He was 15 years old, starving and invisible. But when the pistol slid from the robber's jacket in that dark alley, he was the only thing moving. He threw himself between the polished steel and the terrified woman pressed against the wall. In that split second, a boy with nothing to lose had no idea the life he was saving was a billionaire's, and that her gratitude would rip him from the streets forever. This is the true story of two people living in the same city, yet worlds apart. A boy fighting for survival on streets where over 4 million young Americans vanish every year, and a woman shielded by fortune who never imagined her life would depend on the most invisible person she'd ever meet. So what happens when a single act of courage shatters the barrier between them? To understand that moment in the alley, you need to see the two worlds that were about to collide. One was a world of curated safety, where threats were managed by teams of people. The other was a world of calculated risk, where survival was a daily equation with no room for error. Her world first, Amara Oak. At 44, she wasn't just wealthy, she was a fortress of capital. Her venture firm, Apex Frontier, controlled stakes in 12 countries from Lagos to London. Her net worth floated around $2.3 billion, but numbers don't tell the story of isolation. After her husband's death 3 years prior, Amara withdrew, security details doubled, public appearances vanished. Her life became a series of tinted windows, boardrooms, and empty penthouse views. The city's chaos was a rumor she heard from 30 floors up. She was, by every measure, untouchable and profoundly alone. His world was the inverse. Kofi Mensah, age 15, no social security number, no school records, no fixed address. His home was a network of shadows, the warm grates behind the old power plant, the abandoned storage container near the docks, the back pew of St. Mary's if the night was bitter cold. He belonged to America's hidden population, the estimated 700,000 miners living completely off the grid. For Kofi, each day presented the same brutal math: find food, avoid police sweeps, stay invisible, and above all, do not attract the attention of the older street crews, for whom boys like him were either recruits or prey. Their paths were never meant to cross. Amara's driver, Samuel, had specific instructions: never use side streets after dark. That Tuesday, a jackknife truck on the expressway changed everything. Samuel took a detour down a service road, promising it was a quick, clean shortcut. He was wrong. In the alley, two men stepped from a doorway, not professionals, desperate men. One carried a pipe. The other's hand nervously clutched something inside his jacket. Meanwhile, Kofi was having the worst day of a bad year. He'd been chased from his usual spot by a new gang claiming territory. His makeshift backpack, holding his only extra shirt and a half-eaten granola bar, was stolen while he napped. Now, as dusk bled into night, a hollow ache gripped his stomach. He was weighing a terrible risk, trying to sneak into the back kitchen of a diner known to leave trash bags out early, a spot also frequented by a dealer who didn't like witnesses. He heard the car door slam first, then the raised voices. From his hiding spot behind a dumpster, he saw the scene unfold like a silent film. The sleek car, the woman in the cream-colored dress stepping out, phone to her ear, arguing with her driver about the route. The two men approaching, the sudden shift in posture, the pipe coming up, the woman's face frozen in a mask of disbelief, then raw terror as she was shoved against the brick wall. Hear what the data says about this moment. Research analyzing real street conflicts shows in over 90% of dangerous emergencies, at least one bystander intervenes. But the calculus for a homeless teenager is different. Intervention could mean injury. Injury could mean infection, inability to scavenge, a death sentence. It could mean police attention, which for Kofi meant possible detention, a system he'd spent years avoiding. Every instinct told him to melt deeper into the shadows. This was not his problem. These were not his people. In the hierarchy of need, his own survival topped the list. But then he saw the glint. The man with his hand in his jacket finally pulled it out. Not a knife. A small nickel-plated pistol. He fumbled with it, pointing it shakily at Amara's driver, Samuel, who had his hands up. And Kofi remembered his sister. Not a memory he often allowed. The memory of 8-year-old Amma, years ago, crying as two older boys stole her school shoes back in Accra. He, only 10 himself, had stood frozen, watching, paralyzed by fear. He never forgave himself for that stillness. Amma died of cholera 2 seasons later. The shame of his inaction never did. The pistol wavered toward Amara. The man with the pipe raised it. Kofi didn't think. He moved. He erupted from behind the dumpster, a thin, ragged projectile. He didn't shout. He didn't tackle. He simply placed his body between the gun and the woman, his arms spread wide, facing the armed men. He was a silhouette against the car's headlights. For a stunned second, everything stopped. The robber with the gun blinked, his plan derailed by this sudden, illogical variable. A kid, a street kid. Get lost, he snarled, waving the gun. Kofi didn't flinch. He just stood there, a human shield. Run, he whispered over his shoulder to Amara, a command so low it was almost inaudible. The man with the pipe reacted first. Anger flashed across his face. This skinny boy was ruining it. He lunged, not at Amara but at the obstacle. The pipe swung in a short, hard arc. It didn't aim for Kofi's head. It connected with a sickening crack against his ribs. The force lifted Kofi off his feet, throwing him sideways into the car's fender. He crumpled, the wind blasted from his lungs, a white-hot fire erupting in his side. But in that lunge, the gunman's attention fractured. Samuel, the driver, saw his opening. He wasn't a fighter, but he was brave. He slammed his shoulder into the gunman, sending the pistol clattering across the wet asphalt. The sound of the skidding metal was a signal. Down the alley, a door opened, light spilled out. A voice yelled, "Hey, what's going on?" The two robbers looked at each other, then at the open door, then at the moaning boy on the ground and the disarmed gun. Flight 1. They turned and sprinted into the darkness, leaving the pipe behind. Silence rushed back in, broken only by Kofi's ragged, wet gasps for air. Amara stood, still pressed against the wall, her mind trying to process the last 15 seconds. The attack, the boy appearing from nowhere, the blow, the fight, the escape. Her eyes went from her shaken driver to the thin figure curled on the ground. She took a hesitant step forward, then another. She knelt beside him. Up close, he was younger than she'd thought. His face was pinched with pain, his eyes squeezed shut. His clothes were thin, ripped, soaked through with alley grime. And the dark stain spreading across his side wasn't just water. It was blood seeping through the gray fabric. "Hey," she said, her voice strangely calm. "Look at me." His eyes opened. They were wide with pain and fear. "You're okay," she said, though she didn't know if it was true. "You're going to be okay." She looked up at Samuel, her business sharpness returning. "Call 911 now, and then call Marcus. Tell him what happened. No details to anyone else." But as Samuel fumbled for his phone, Kofi's hand shot out, gripping Amara's wrist with surprising strength. His voice was a pained whisper. No hospital." Amara stared at him. "You need a doctor, you're hurt." "Please," he begged, his eyes desperate. "No systems, they'll take me, foster care, it's worse." He was speaking from a place of ingrained, street-level truth. For many homeless youth, institutions represent a different kind of danger, a labyrinth of paperwork and placements that often spit them back out, more vulnerable than before. Amara Oak, dealmaker, billionaire, sat back on her heels. The boy who had just taken a blow meant for her was begging not to be helped in the conventional way. The sirens wailed in the distance, growing louder. She had a choice: hand this problem to the authorities, get in her car, and return to her sterile, safe tower, or do something else entirely. She looked at his hand, still on her wrist, dirty and trembling. She looked at the fear in his eyes, not of the injury, but of the rescue. In that moment, the fortress of her life developed its first crack. She made a decision. "Forget the ambulance," Amara said to Samuel, her voice cutting through the alley's tension. "We're taking him to the townhouse. Call Dr. Chen, tell him it's an emergency and to bring a portable X-ray. And Samuel, no one else knows about this." They helped Kofi into the back seat of the Mercedes. He was shivering, shock setting in. Amara slid in beside him, shrugging out of her light cashmere wrap and draping it over him. The scent of expensive perfume mixed with the alley's damp decay. "Just breathe," she murmured as Samuel peeled away from the curb, sirens flashing past them in the opposite direction. In her penthouse world, problems were solved with phone calls and contracts. Now she had a bleeding, terrified child in her car, and the rules had changed. The townhouse was not her primary residence, but a secured property used for discreet meetings. Samuel pulled into a private underground garage. Dr. Chen, Amara's private physician for 15 years, was already waiting, his medical case at his feet. He didn't ask questions until they had Kofi on a clean sheet in a spare room. Then the examination began, and the true cost of street life was laid bare. The immediate injury was a cracked rib and severe bruising, but that was just the headline. Dr. Chen's expression grew graver with each finding. Malnutrition, evident in his low body temperature and brittle hair. Old scars, a faint knife wound on his forearm, a burn on his shoulder. Signs of chronic respiratory irritation from sleeping near exhaust vents. And the psychological markers: hypervigilance, flinching at sudden movements, a refusal to make eye contact that spoke of ingrained survival tactics. This young man has been in a prolonged state of physical and emotional crisis, Dr. Chen said quietly to Amara in the hallway. The rib will heal in 6 weeks with rest. The rest, there's no quick fix. He needs consistent nutrition, a safe environment, and likely therapeutic support. Amara leaned against the wall, the adrenaline finally draining. Can he stay here quietly? For now, but Amara, be realistic. He's a minor with no documentation. This is a legal minefield. Someone will notice he's missing from whatever ecosystem he was part of. She knew he was right, but sending him into the foster system felt like a betrayal. He hadn't asked for that. He'd asked not to be sent there. She walked back into the room. Kofi was sitting up, staring at the pristine white duvet as if it might bite him. Why did you do that? She asked, her voice softer now. In the alley, you didn't know me. Kofi kept his eyes on the duvet. He shrugged, then winced at the pain. They had a gun, you were scared. He said it like it was a simple equation, a fact of the urban landscape. It was more than that, Amara pressed. You could have been killed. Finally, he looked at her. His eyes were old, far older than 15. People like me die on the streets all the time. 5,000 a year, they say. What's one more? The statistic landed with the weight of a personal epitaph. He believed it. That night, Amara couldn't sleep. In her silent penthouse, the image of Kofi's defiant, pained face wouldn't leave her. She got up and did something she hadn't done in years. She researched, not market trends, but youth homelessness statistics. The numbers were a gut punch. 4.2 million young people annually, 700,000 of them minors. A pipeline from poverty, abuse, and foster care failure to the streets. Mortality rates from violence, illness, suicide. She read about the throwaway youth phenomenon, kids so detached from systems they effectively didn't exist. Kofi was one of 700,000 ghosts. Meanwhile, in the townhouse, Kofi was having a parallel crisis. The soft bed felt like a trap. The silence was deafening. Every instinct screamed that this comfort was temporary, a prelude to a worse fall. He checked the window locks, memorized the hallway layout, and pocketed a butter knife from the kitchenette. Trust was a currency he couldn't afford. He slept for 1 hour, then jerked awake at a floorboard creak, his hand closing around the knife handle under his pillow. The next morning, the first external pressure arrived. Marcus, Amara's head of security, a former Secret Service agent, stood in her office. The police report is filed as an attempted mugging, he said, but there are anomalies. The service road wasn't a random choice. Traffic cameras show a gray sedan forcing the truck to jackknife 15 minutes before your car arrived. It was a coordinated diversion. Amara felt a chill. Are you saying I was targeted? Possibly. The two men were low-level, hired muscle. They're in the wind, but the planning suggests someone wanted access to you outside your normal protocols. Marcus paused. And there's the boy. His presence disrupted the plan. If they were after you specifically, he's now a witness, a vulnerable one. The stakes had just exploded. What she thought was a random act of violence now had the shape of a threat, and Kofi, by his accidental heroism, was in the crosshairs. She had brought him into her world, and now her world's dangers were his. She went to the townhouse that afternoon with a new purpose. She found Kofi in the garden, tense as a coiled spring. We need to talk, she said. The men who attacked us, they might have been there for me, on purpose. Kofi absorbed this without surprise. On the streets, you learn that nothing was truly random, so they'll try again. Maybe, and they saw you, that makes you a target too. She took a deep breath. I can't send you away, not now, but I can't just hide you here forever. What do you want? He looked at her truly confounded. No one had ever asked him that. His wants had been reduced to basic needs for so long: food, shelter, safety. The concept of a future was abstract. "I don't know," he said honestly. "Then let me make a proposal," Amara said. "You stay, you let Dr. Chen help you get healthy, you let a tutor I hire catch you up on school, and in return, you help me." "Help you how?" "Your instincts saved my life. You see the city in a way I never will. My security team knows protocols. You know reality. Be my reality consultant. Tell me where my blind spots are." It was a bizarre offer. A billionaire hiring a homeless teen as a security advisor, but it gave him a role, a value beyond charity. It preserved a shred of the dignity he'd clung to on the streets. He nodded slowly. "Okay." For 2 weeks, a fragile routine took hold. Kofi gained weight. He began working with a patient tutor named Elijah, who discovered a sharp, undernourished mind grasping at geometry and history with desperate hunger. And he met with Marcus, poring over maps of the city, pointing out blind alleys, vulnerable transit points, and the unofficial territories of various street groups. His insights were uncanny and immediately useful. But the outside world was tightening its grip. A private investigator hired by Marcus tracked down Kofi's history. His real name was Kofi Ajay. He'd entered the country with his aunt from Ghana 6 years prior on a visitor visa that long expired. His aunt had died of an overdose 2 years ago. He had no other family here, and his status was undocumented. He was, legally, a ghost. This created an impossible bind. To get him any form of legal identity, a social security number, a school record, would require engaging with the very systems he feared, systems that could lead to detention and deportation. Amara's lawyers were clear. They were harboring an undocumented minor, a scandal waiting to happen. The pressure came to a head on day 18. A tabloid journalist, tipped off by a source in the police department about a mystery boy in the billionaire's care, staked out the townhouse. He got a blurry photo of Kofi walking in the walled garden. The headline the next day was predictable: "Billionaire Heiress's Street Boy Rescue, Heartwarming Charity or Hidden Secret." Amara's public relations team went into overdrive, crafting a statement about a charitable youth outreach program. But the damage was done. The spotlight was on, and in that spotlight, darker forces took notice. Marcus intercepted a communication. The 2 hired men from the alley had been found floating in the river, professional hits. Whoever had hired them was cleaning house. And the journalist who took the photo, he received an anonymous, untraceable email. It didn't threaten him. It simply contained a list of every school his children attended. The message was clear. The story died instantly. This wasn't corporate espionage or a random kidnapping plot. This was something darker, more personal, and far more dangerous. The person who wanted Amara Oak wasn't just after her money. They were sending a message. They could reach her anywhere, and they were willing to erase anyone in their way. That night, Amara stood at the townhouse's secure gate, looking out at the quiet, tree-lined street. It felt like a painted backdrop, an illusion of safety. The real city, the one Kofi knew, was pressing in. She had thought she was rescuing him from the streets, but now she realized the streets were just one layer of danger. She had pulled him into a different kind of fight, one fought in shadows with infinite resources. She turned and went inside. Kofi was in the library, frowning at an algebra problem. He looked up. "They killed them, didn't they?" he asked. No fear in his voice, just a cold acceptance of the world's mechanics. "Yes," Amara said. He put his pencil down. "Then they're not done. They failed once. They'll try again, and next time they won't send guys who hesitate." He looked at her, the student gone, the survivor fully present. "You need to find out who wants you dead before they find a way to finish it." He was right. The period of quiet recovery was over. The investigation had to move from defensive to offensive. But to hunt a predator, you have to understand its nature. And the first place to look was not in corporate boardrooms, but in the one place Amara had never fully scrutinized: her own past and the fortune that insulated her from it. The answers and the next wave of danger were waiting in the foundations of the very empire she had built. The hunt began not with a bang, but with a single question: who stood to gain? Amara had spent her career in deal rooms, and every threat there was transactional. But this felt different. This felt like a ghost from the foundation of her life, and to find it, she and Kofi would have to excavate the one story she never told. They started with the obvious business rivals. Apex Frontier had displaced giants, and there were losers in every deal. Marcus's team ran forensic checks on the 12 most likely candidates. The alibis were solid, the motivations purely financial. A corporate hit is clean, quiet, and leaves assets intact, Marcus reported. Drowning two low-level thugs in a river is messy, personal. This is a grudge. The word grudge echoed in Amara's mind. She had few personal enemies. She was disciplined, private, and fair in her dealings. But there was one period of her life shrouded in pain and secrecy, the years with her late husband, Tund. Tund Oak, charismatic, brilliant, and deeply troubled. He'd co-founded Apex Frontier with Amara, but his vision was increasingly reckless, bordering on predatory. 3 years before his death, they'd had a brutal, private falling out. He wanted to pursue a series of acquisitions in conflict zones, deals that blurred ethical lines. She refused, using her controlling stake to block him. In a rage, he'd accused her of betraying their shared dream. He left the company, and their marriage became a cold war. 6 months later, he was found dead in his Geneva apartment. An accidental prescription drug interaction, the coroner ruled. Amara had accepted the verdict, buried her grief under work, and moved on. Now she wondered if she'd buried the truth instead. She allowed Marcus to reopen Tund's file, and that's when they found the first anomaly. 2 weeks before his death, Tund had withdrawn $2 million in untraceable cryptocurrency from a shell company. The money vanished. The transaction was flagged by their internal auditors at the time, but with Tund's death, the investigation was closed. Where did that money go? Amara asked, a cold dread forming. Kofi, observing the security briefings, asked a different question. Why then? He was mad at you for years. Why make a move 2 weeks before he died? The boy's street-honed sense of timing was sharper than any corporate analysis. It pointed to a catalyst. Answer came from an unexpected source, Kofi's memory. While reviewing security footage from the months before the alley attack, he saw a man, a face in the background of 3 different locations near Amara's office, her gym, her favorite charity gala. Not a professional tale, too visible, too consistent. A man making sure he was seen. Marcus ran facial recognition. The man was Emeka Nwasu, a former personal driver for Tund Oak, discharged for attitude problems 5 years ago. He had no criminal record, but he had vanished from official records 2 years back. They had a thread. Marcus tracked Emeka to a working-class neighborhood in Newark. He lived quietly, drove for a rideshare company. Surveillance showed no signs of wealth or outside influence. He was a ghost, just like Kofi had been. But when Marcus's team dug into his finances, they found the echo of Tund's $2 million, a series of small, regular deposits into an account held by Emeka's sister, who was undergoing expensive cancer treatment. The payments started 3 years ago, right after Tund's death, and were still active. The source was a Caribbean bank with no cooperation policy. The pieces locked together with a terrible click. Tund hadn't died accidentally, he'd been eliminated, and someone had been paying his loyal former driver ever since. For what? For watching, for waiting, for orchestrating an attack that wasn't meant to kidnap or ransom Amara, but to send a message of vulnerability, a message from beyond the grave. But who? Amara whispered, the walls of her office feeling paper-thin. Tund had no heirs. His family is in Nigeria. They accepted the settlement. Then she remembered the one person Tund had been closer to than her in his final, estranged years. His younger brother, Chijioke. Chijioke C.J. Oak. The charming, unstable brother Tund had always bailaid out of trouble. CJ had been a constant source of tension. Amara had cut him off from company funds after Tund's death, paying him a final, substantial severance to leave her life. He'd taken the money, threatened lawsuits, then disappeared. She'd assumed he'd blown the cash on his usual vices. Now she wondered if he'd been planning a much longer game. Finding CJ proved impossible through normal channels. He was off-grid, so Amara made a radical decision. She asked Kofi for help. You know how to find people who don't want to be found. How would you look for him? Kofi thought for a day, then he said, he doesn't want to be found by you, but he's rich now or was. Rich people leave a smell. They need things normal people don't. He suggested looking for patterns in luxury goods shipments, private clinic admissions for drug rehab, high-stakes poker games in offshore casinos. It was a different kind of data mining. Using Kofi's instincts as a guide, Marcus's team filtered intelligence through this new lens. They found a match. A man matching CJ's description under a false Belizean passport had been a regular at a high-roller baccarat table in a Macau casino for the past 18 months. He lost consistently heavily and always settled his debts in cash. The casino's silent partners were a known front for a Nigerian syndicate specializing in corporate blackmail and assassination. The connection was now a bridge. CJ had likely blown through his severance, fallen into debt with dangerous people, and offered them a deal, his brother's billion-dollar company, as collateral. He must have promised them access to Amara, perhaps through forced signing of documents during a kidnapping. The failed alley attack was his first play. The cleanup of the hired men was the syndicate protecting its investment, and now they knew their cover was blown. The retaliation was swift and terrifying. It didn't target Amara. It targeted the new variable, Kofi. 2 days after the Macau discovery, the townhouse's security system logged a sophisticated minute-long breach attempt on the biometric locks. It was repelled. Then Kofi's tutor, Elijah, was followed home from the grocery store. A car matched the description of the gray sedan from the original traffic diversion. They were circling, probing, looking for the weak link. Amara realized Kofi was no longer just a witness. He was a lever. If they couldn't get to her directly, they would break what she cared about. And she did care. In the weeks of shared danger and quiet evenings of study, the boy who was a project had become a person. A fierce, intelligent, wounded young man she felt responsible for. The thought of him being hurt because of her was intolerable. She convened a war council in the townhouse's secure basement. Marcus, Dr. Chen, her most trusted lawyer, and Kofi were present. "We have 2 options," Marcus said. "We go to the federal authorities with what we have. It's circumstantial, but it might get CJ picked up for questioning and scare off the syndicate. Or we go dark, move you and Kofi to a safe location outside the country until we can build an ironclad case." Kofi spoke up from the corner. "They'll wait. If they want the company, they'll just wait until you come back, or they'll find another way. They know you care about me now. That's a permanent weakness." He was right. Disappearing was a postponement, not a solution. Amara looked at the faces around the room. The lawyer was nervous, Dr. Chen concerned, Marcus analytical. Kofi's expression was one of grim acceptance. He'd seen this movie before. The powerful get attacked, and the people around them get crushed. He was preparing to be crushed. In that moment, Amara Oak's entire perspective shifted. She had been playing a defensive game, protecting her fortress. But the fortress was compromised. The only way to protect the people inside was to destroy the threat at its source. Not through the law, which moved too slowly, but through the same ruthless economics that had built her empire. "I have a third option," she said, her voice low and steady. "We don't run, and we don't just defend. We bankrupt him. We find every debt CJ has, every marker he holds, and we buy them. We turn his allies into his creditors, and then we call in the debt in a way that leaves him with nothing to offer the syndicate but his own skin." It was a monstrous gamble. It meant diving into the underworld of international finance and organized crime, using her capital as a weapon. It meant risking her reputation, her company, and possibly her freedom. But it was the only move that didn't leave Kofi or anyone else she loved in perpetual danger. Kofi stared at her, understanding the magnitude of what she was proposing. She wasn't just fighting for her life. She was declaring war for his. "You can't do that," he said. "It's too much." Amara met his gaze. "You took a pipe for a stranger. I can take a financial hit for you." The equation, in her mind, was already balanced. The decision was made. They would go on the offensive. Marcus would use his intelligence contacts to map the syndicate's financial network. Amara's lawyers would establish cutouts and shell companies to make the purchases. They would systematically dismantle CJ's worth, and by extension, his usefulness, from the inside out. But as they began to mobilize, a final, chilling piece of information arrived. Marcus's contact in Macau sent a blurred photo from a casino security feed. It showed CJ Oak laughing with his arm around another man. The man was turned away, but his wrist was visible. On it was a distinctive watch, a Patek Philippe that Amara had given Tund on their 5th anniversary. A watch buried with him. The message was no longer just financial, it was psychological. CJ wasn't just spending his brother's money, he was wearing his skin, and the syndicate he was in bed with had clearly helped him dig it up. The war wasn't just about a company anymore. It was about legacy, memory, and a poison that had been festering for years. Amara and Kofi were about to step into a darkness far deeper than any alley, and the only way out was through. The war moved from the shadows to the spreadsheet. Amara Oak, the queen of venture capital, was about to wage a hostile takeover of a nightmare. She would use the one weapon her enemy understood, money. But this time, she wasn't buying companies. She was buying debts, and with them, the souls of the men who held them. The operation, dubbed Project Anchor by Marcus, was a masterpiece of financial jiu-jitsu. Through a labyrinth of offshore trusts and anonymous corporate entities, Amara's team began quietly purchasing the markers CJ had left across the globe. His $2 million tab at the Macau casino was bought for $2.3 million. His lines of credit with 3 separate syndicate-linked lenders in Lagos, Dubai, and Bangkok were acquired at a premium. Within 72 hours, Amara became CJ's sole, anonymous creditor, and then she called in the debt. The demand was simple, delivered through encrypted channels to the syndicate's representatives. Cease all hostile actions against Amara Oak and her associates. Hand over Chijioke Oak. In return, the debts would be forgiven, and a one-time payment of $5 million would be made for their administrative cooperation. The alternative was the immediate, public calling of every note, which would force the syndicate to either kill CJ themselves, bad for business reputation, or expose their entire lending operation to international scrutiny. It was an offer designed to be accepted. The syndicate was a business, not a family. CJ was a bad investment who had failed to deliver. Cutting their losses and taking a clean fee was the logical move. Amara was betting everything that their greed would outweigh their pride. For 48 hours, there was only silence. Tension in the townhouse was a physical presence. Then an email arrived. Coordinates for a meeting at a private airfield in upstate New York. No weapons, 2 people only, Amara and a driver. They would bring CJ, they would take the money, and then it would be over. Marcus argued against it being a trap. The syndicate had no incentive. Their financial trails were now known to Amara's team. A double cross would be mutually assured destruction. Amara decided to go. She asked Kofi what he thought. He looked at her and said, "You have to look him in the eye, so he knows he lost to you, not just to money." On a cold, clear morning, Amara and Samuel drove to the airfield. In a sterile private hangar, under the watchful eyes of 4 impassive men, she met her brother-in-law for the first time in 4 years. Chijioke Oak was a ghost of his former self. The charming plebe was gone, replaced by a gaunt, twitching man in a rumpled suit. His eyes held a mix of terror and venom. The Patek Philippe was gone from his companion's wrist. "They sold me out," CJ spat, his voice brittle. "You sold yourself," Amara replied, her voice calm. "You tried to trade your brother's memory for a gambling stake. You failed." "He was my brother. His company was my birthright," CJ shouted, taking a step forward before one of the syndicate men put a firm hand on his shoulder. "Tund built that company with me. He left it to me. You were paid to go away. You chose not to." Amara looked past him to the head syndicate representative, a tall man in an overcoat. "Do we have an agreement?" The man nodded once. "The asset is yours. The funds have been received. Our business is concluded." With that, he and his men turned and walked out of the hangar, leaving CJ standing alone, exposed, and utterly worthless to the people he'd indebted himself to. Back at the townhouse, the legal and personal reckoning began. Amara's lawyers presented CJ with a choice: sign a comprehensive confession detailing his plot, including his suspicion that Tun's death was not accidental, but a murder he had arranged with the syndicate to access the funds, and accept permanent exile from the United States and any claim to the Oak estate, or face extradition to Nigeria on fraud charges, with the syndicate's evidence against him delivered to Interpol. Broken and out of options, CJ signed. The confession was a horrifying document. It revealed that Tund, in his final paranoid days, had planned to change his will, leaving control to CJ to preserve the family legacy from Amara's Western influence. CJ, impatient and deep in debt, had accelerated the process. The coroner in Geneva was quietly revisited with new evidence. Tun's death was reclassified as a homicide. A ghost was laid to rest. With the direct threat neutralized, Amara turned to the future. The first order of business was Kofi. His legal status was an untenable limbo. Using the confession as leverage, and with the full force of her legal team, Amara petitioned for humanitarian parole for Kofi as a material witness in a transnational criminal investigation. It was granted. Then she began the process of becoming his legal guardian, a move supported by psych evaluations and his documented history as an unaccompanied homeless minor. The road to citizenship would be long, but for the first time, it existed. But the story didn't end with paperwork. The alley had changed them both. Amara could not unsee the invisible city Kofi came from. She quietly dissolved Apex Frontiers venture fund and used a third of her personal fortune, over $700 million, to launch the Anchor Foundation. Its mission was singular: to identify and support homeless youth aging out of systems, providing not just housing, but education, mental health care, and a path to sustainable employment. The foundation's board had an unusual junior advisor, Kofi Mensah. His insights shaped its outreach programs, focusing on low-barrier, no-questions-asked safe havens, the kind he would have used. Kofi, for his part, faced his own journey. The trauma of the streets didn't vanish with a warm bed. He had nightmares, panic attacks in crowded rooms, a deep-seated fear that it would all be taken away. He worked with a therapist specializing in adolescent trauma. He enrolled in a private academy under an accelerated program, his fierce intelligence finally having room to grow. He learned to drive. He got his first library card. He made a friend, small, monumental victories. A year after the alley, Amara took him to dinner, not at a restaurant, but at the townhouse. Over a meal they cooked together, she slid a folder across the table. Inside were the finalized guardianship papers and a deed. The deed was for a small, renovated brownstone in a quiet neighborhood. "It's yours," she said. "No conditions. It's in a trust for you, so you always have a place that's yours no matter what." Kofi stared at the documents, his eyes glistening. He had gone from owning nothing to owning a key. "Why?" he asked, the same question from the first night. Amara smiled. "Because you taught me that my greatest investment shouldn't be in markets, but in people, and you're the best investment I've ever made." The final, surprising detail emerged months later, during the renovation of the brownstone. Workers found a metal box hidden in the basement ceiling, left by a previous owner. Inside were faded photographs and letters from the 1970s. The letters told a story of a young immigrant couple who had lost everything in a war, arrived in the city with nothing, and were taken in by a stranger who gave them a room above his shop until they got on their feet. The last letter, dated 1982, was a thank you note, enclosing the first mortgage payment for the very brownstone, now paid off. The stranger's act of kindness had echoed through decades, literally providing the foundation for Kofi's new home. The circle felt complete. Amara Oak found a purpose that her billions never afforded her. Kofi Ajay found a future he never dared imagine. One was saved from a life of hollow isolation, the other from a statistic of street mortality. Their story became a quiet legend, not in the tabloids, but in the halls of the Anchor Foundation, where hundreds of other invisible kids began their own journeys out of the dark. The boy who had nothing gave a woman her humanity back. The woman who had everything gave a boy his life back, and in that exchange, both were redeemed. The balance of the world, if only for a moment, was corrected by a single, defiant act in a forgotten alley, an act that proved that courage is not the absence of fear, but the decision that something else is more important, and that sometimes the person who saves you is the one you never saw coming. So what does this story leave us with? Not just a tale of a billionaire and a street kid, but a mirror held up to our own streets, our own alleys, our own moments of choice. We began with a statistic. Over 4 million young people experience homelessness in America each year. 700,000 of them are minors like Kofi was, navigating a world that has decided not to see them. Their reality isn't a dramatic movie plot. It's a daily calculus of hunger, fear, and invisibility. But the research we cited at the beginning holds a powerful, counterintuitive truth. In clearly dangerous situations, bystanders do intervene. Over 90% of the time, The instinct to help is there, woven into our humanity. The barrier isn't apathy, it's often the overwhelming scale of the problem. We see suffering and think, what can one person do? Kofi and Amara's story is an answer. One person can step between a gun and a stranger. One person can choose not to drive away. One person can use their resources not just for charity, but for justice and systemic change. The Anchor Foundation, born from that alley, now operates in 3 cities, identifying homeless youth through outreach workers who are themselves former street kids. It's a model that works because it listens to the voices of those it serves. But the deeper lesson isn't about grand gestures, it's about attention. Kofi was visible to Amara in that critical second because she was present, not insulated behind her car window. He became real to her, and in becoming real, he changed the entire trajectory of her life. How many people do we pass every day without truly seeing? How many potential connections, stories, and moments of mutual salvation do we miss because we're moving too fast, looking at our screens, or armored in our own concerns? The lingering question this story poses is uncomfortable. In a world that encourages isolation, what are we willing to truly see? And having seen, what are we willing to do? You don't need $1 billion to offer kindness, to make eye contact, to buy a meal, to volunteer at a shelter, or simply to acknowledge the humanity of the person on the corner. These small acts are the threads that can begin to mend a torn social fabric. Kofi now has a high school diploma and is applying to colleges. Amara runs the foundation full-time. The two still have dinner every Sunday. It's not a fairy tale. They argue about movies and politics, and Kofi still sometimes sleeps with a light on. Healing is a process, but they have each other's backs, a family forged not by blood, but by a shared choice in a moment of terror. Their story reminds us that heroism isn't a superpower, it's a decision, and rescue isn't a one-way transaction. When we reach out to save someone, we are often saving a part of ourselves we didn't know was lost. If this story made you think, if it made you feel, then let that feeling be a spark. Look up, see the people around you. Remember that the next great act of courage might not be on a battlefield or in a burning building, but in a quiet moment of human recognition. Tell me in the comments, where are you watching from right now, and what time is it there? If you believe that seeing one another is the first step toward changing the world, don't forget to subscribe. Your attention is the most powerful currency you have. Use it wisely.